And hello, this is Eamonn O'Brien, and you're so welcome to the Reluctant Speakers Club Expert Series. And coming up today, we're going to talk about what it takes to build greater influence and trust in using Hangouts on air as a speaker. And we have a perfect expert to speak with us about this. It is Ronnie Bincer, all the way from Colorado. Hey, Ronnie, how are you?
I'm great, Eamonn, and I am looking forward to this session. I hope that we can get some information that's going to really help your listeners and viewers.
Well, I know we will. I mean, people will know you, of course, as the Hangout helper, and I know you as the expert on pretty much anything that moves when it comes to Hangouts on air. So you're the ideal person to really guide us, I suppose, along the way.
I look forward to it.
Good. So, question for you. Obviously, you've been involved in this space for quite some time. You're a perfect case study, I suppose, in terms of building trust and influence by using video and Hangouts in particular. What got you started, and why did you become such a fan?
Well, first off, thanks for the kudos. I appreciate that. I became such a fan of this Hangout on Air thing primarily when it first came out. I wasn't, nobody was using it because it didn't exist. But when it first showed up, I had been using the video Hangout meeting that's not broadcast or not recorded
Yeah,
for quite a while. That was one of the very first things that I really gravitated to because I saw the connections that it made with the people that I met. And one of the most amazing things to me is when I would meet with somebody visually. And think about this, when you're sending out a video, people are watching you and visually connecting with you. So when I would meet with someone visually in this Hangout tool, and then I started seeing some of their postings or their activity otherwise, it had a different feel for me. It was like I knew that person even though we hadn't ever met in person,
oh,
but
you
I
bet.
had met them. Yeah,
Yeah, well, you have, of course, because, and that's the beauty of a video, because it's a bit like, when you watch television, you feel like you have got a more human connection with the person who you're seeing through the screen.
right.
And
Yeah.
of course, now you help people to really kind of get a much better connection with their audiences on the screen. And tell me, what do you think is at the heart and soul of that? I know I've heard you in the past talking about your attitude. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, attitude, I think, as anyone probably knows, makes a difference. I mean, if you are happy doing what you're doing, it comes across. If you
Yes.
are doing it begrudgingly, that also comes across. And so, when you can have the proper attitude that's inviting, people are going to want more to be around you. And that means, literally, in this case, watch more of your videos and see what the other things are you have to say.
Yes. And but now, obviously you've been doing this for quite some time. And so if you think about people who are starting out at the outset, and I work with a lot of speakers, and speakers, although they're great at speaking to an audience, oftentimes when they're looking at a camera, all of a sudden the rules change. And
Right.
now I'm looking at something inanimate and it's not talking back to me and I can't get a reaction to it. So how did you learn to kind of create the right kind of conversation where you're getting into people's homes, into their offices?
I think part of it goes back to the idea of actually meeting other people in this video hangout tool, just in a one-on-one or a small group setting where you're actually chatting with other people. And then you see how it automatically makes a difference.
Yeah,
And then when you can visualize in your head the fact that when you're making a video, people are able to watch and learn and connect with you in a way that they never could have before, you start to embrace the idea that maybe this can work for me. But it's a very important point you mentioned. When I'm looking at a camera, like I'm doing right now, it's hard to visualize that there's a person on the other end or many people on
it
the other
does.
end.
It does. And in fact, one of the best bits of advice I was ever given is to make sure that you smile, because sometimes we can look awfully serious.
Right. Yeah, and an advantage of the tools that we're talking about, at least the one I spend a lot of time with, this Hangout and Air broadcast thing, is we can make an unlisted video so that we can go back and look at it later and nobody else sees it and decide, you know what, that one wasn't so good, let me redo that.
Yes.
And for a speaker, someone who's speaking at a live event, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to redo that.
Oh no, there's no do-overs.
Right, right. So this actually can give you a little bit more flexibility if you were trying something out and you weren't sure how to properly phrase it. You can try something, take a look at it, see if you liked it, and if you didn't, go ahead and do it again until you get it just right. But there is an aspect to doing them live, right? And when you're doing them live and it's being broadcast, that's back into the realm of standing up in front of a crowd of people and doing your best to address them. Now,
You do, yeah.
technically, it's a challenge. I'll still admit to this day, it's still a challenge to try to keep looking at the camera
Yes.
because our eyes are drawn to look at you. Like right now, I just turned down a little and I see you better, so I can actually have the conversation with you.
Oh yes.
But the
Yeah.
viewer doesn't see it that way. So you really want to try to train yourself when you're doing these things to be looking at the camera.
Yeah, and actually, for people when they're starting out and they're really just trying to kind of getting up to speed, because I like something that you said earlier on that you can try things out. What's your best advice on getting comfortable in front of a camera and really just being able to have conversations like you would as if someone was in your living room or in your office?
My first advice would be to get someone who's a friend and have them
Yes.
join you. Have them join you inside this video call thing and just talk to them and ask them their feedback. Does it look like I'm talking to you? And those kind of things will make a difference when you eventually get into the place where you're doing a recording or a broadcast. Now, also when you can, and this is going to sound a little silly, but it works.
Okay, I'm good with silly.
Okay, get a picture of someone you like and put it on the wall right behind where the camera is. That way you can be
Yeah,
looking at that, and if you position it right, you can actually be looking at that and trying to connect with that person when you're talking to them
yeah.
through the camera.
I actually, that's a great piece of advice, and it also applies to when you're doing solo types of runs, because when you're looking at a camera, that's really not what you want to do. You kind of want to look through the camera as if you're actually speaking to somebody that's behind it,
Hmm.
and actually putting a face behind it is a great idea. You can actually put it to the left or to the right of it. It doesn't have to be directly behind it. But if you feel like you're actually speaking literally, sometimes I call it the granny test. If you imagine your granny was on the other side of the camera. Now, obviously, you're not my
Right.
granny, and I can see you, so we're having a proper conversation. But that's hugely helpful because you want people to hear that you care and there's warmth.
Right. And that visual, the eye is the window to the soul, as is said.
It
And
is.
so when people can see that you're trying to connect with them and you're speaking with them, this is probably better. Now, it's hard when you have so many facts or so much content you want to try to get across. But I'm sure you discuss how do we get such a massive amount of information presented in a way that actually doesn't scare people off.
Well, you're exactly right. And actually, one of the interesting things, as you know from speaking, is that, as a speaker, less is more.
Yep.
So instead of me trying to give you lots and lots of things as during the course of this conversation, we're sticking to a fairly central theme, which is how do we up our engagement, our trust, our influence with people because they believe us. And so if you try and limit that, then the conversation is much more natural, it's much more interesting to folks, and um, uh, everybody gets more out of it, which is really important.
Yeah, I'm give a little factoid. I used to travel around the world literally and do training sessions in front of groups of people live. No, not in front of a camera per se,
Yes.
but standing up in front of a room, and it was a technical thing. I was training people how to use software programs. And when the company I was doing the work for first asked me to create my own materials, I did, and they said, "Great, now cut it in half." I said, "No, no, I need to cover all these things."
No,
And
you
they said,
don't.
"No, cut it in half." And so I did.
Yeah.
And then they said, "Wonderful, looking better. Now cut it in half again." And I
Yeah.
thought, no, that's just impossible.
Yeah.
But I did, and I got to the point where I could have a better rhythm and a better flow, and the method that I would use to present the information stuck
Yeah.
better with the people that were listening.
Absolutely, and actually, that the secret really is to limit the number of messages, and then amplify it through lots and lots of interesting stories and anecdotes where people can see what you're talking about.
Right.
And on that bombshell, it'd be really interesting to kind of get your thoughts about the things that have kind of influenced you as you look at people who do a great job sharing content through
I
Hangouts.
Through Hangouts, I believe you utilize the word story. I believe
Yeah, I sure did.
storytelling is a big part of it, so that people have a way to relate to you. If you're just talking about a specific thing, even if it's technical, if you give a reason why this technical thing matters to you and how it made a difference for what you were doing, then people can grasp onto that and they're going to remember it longer. And to me, that there's so much information coming at us so fast, so often, that if something can become more memorable, then I think you've won the battle for attention when you get right down to it. So turning things into a story helps people contextualize it, and that contextualization, I think, is what makes a difference for them remembering. One person I do like to share a lot of their content is a gentleman named Martin Shervington. And
Oh, sure.
I like the way he presents information because he normally will give you the basics and then respond back to in some of the more of the details. And at first, I don't know that I could say I liked that with everybody. But Martin is so relational when he does his sharing of his things that you just got to like him, okay? And so as a result of that,
Yeah.
you kind of let go some of the other expectations that you might have had, and the fact that he knows what he's doing makes it one of those things that you just sort of it's easier to accept.
Yeah.
Other people I see get very technical in how they share things, and they're trying to cover everything, and I myself will fit into that camp sometimes. And sometimes we get so much information out there that people lose track of what the real meaning is behind it. And
Yeah.
that's a tricky area to try to balance that line when you're someone like me who's sort of a trainer.
Yes.
And I know that there's always an if, and, or a but involved,
You bet.
but I can't really cover all those things at once. Otherwise, the post would be so long, people will say, wow, I'm not going to read that. Too much time.
No, no, absolutely not. And as I commonly say to people when I'm training them on speaking, men, we can't multitask. And the truth is, women are not actually that much better. So the truth is, if we ask people to do too many things, they don't do any of them at all. But let me ask you this. So when it comes to the purpose of sharing content online and on Hangouts, of course, really what we're doing is we're starting conversations, sharing something that's of value. And it's very important, of course, if you're having a conversation that it's not one way. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts about how you up interaction from videos that you create on Hangouts with the people who get to see what you're talking about.
This is one of my favorite areas. And
I knew that.
yeah, yeah. I believe, and I've seen this more often than not, that most people are using this tool as a broadcasting tool, and that only. They're not using it for what I think its real value is. And the real value for me is it's a trust builder.
Yes.
It builds trust. And people will trust you more when they see that you can respond or interact with questions or comments that are clearly not scripted.
Yes.
Okay? Because if they can see that you can think on your feet, then all of a sudden now they will relate better to you and realize you're not just talking about a canned thing that you know what to say every time and it's always perfect each time. So this realness or humanity that comes through the process is something I truly encourage people to do, and part of that means building an audience, because if otherwise you don't have an audience that you're going to be actually speaking with, then it's hard to interact with them, right? So
That's for sure.
multiple layers of interaction. One is within the Hangout. So if you have multiple people within this Hangout environment, you can be asking questions within the film strip, is what we call it. But also, what I really like when you're doing these things live is the ability to interact with the viewers live. This is what I call interactive TV.
Yes. And do you have any favorite tools that you just love?
I do, and it's a techie one. It's
Oh, right.
unfortunate.
Go on. I'll go and get my anorak then. Go on.
Okay. It's called the comment tracker tool.
Oh, right. Yes.
Because the comment tracker tool allows us to not only track comments that are coming from various places, but allows us to bring the visual of that comment right onto the screen. And the beauty of that is that allows people that are watching and interacting with comments, with whatever you're doing live, are able to be part of the show. They're able to be part of the video because now you see the text that they've typed, you see their profile picture, and you, if you present it well as you're doing your show, can interact with that comment and answer the question or the comment after reading it right on the screen. So if you don't have a comment tracker skill, you haven't figured out how to
Yeah.
make it work, you can look through the comments and say, okay, Sue, I see your question about this, and this is my answer for that. I'm going to first read the question. And this
Yeah.
is, this is stuff you do in a Q&A if you're in a live meeting situation. At least this is what I do.
Well, yeah.
When
Yeah.
someone in the audience says a question, they ask you a question, I repeat the question because you never know whether everybody really heard what they were asking. So this is the process you do. Someone's asked a question by typing it, so I repeat the question verbally. And if I'm using a comment tracker, I also bring it up visually at the same time. And then I turn off the visual of the comment, and then I respond to it. So this not only answers that person's question, but hopefully it addresses other people's questions that were related to that. And here's the key. All of a sudden, other people start asking questions. And
They
now
do.
the interaction starts to build up.
They do. And interestingly, you're doing something very important because what you're actually doing is kind of shout outs because you're not just seeing the question. And actually, of course, you do necessarily have to look sideways, I suppose, to get access to it. But because you're actually repeating the question, you're validating whoever has sent the thought into you. And the upshot is everybody feels, oh, I can be involved in this. And I guess they do.
Right? And then they tell their friends next time, if he's doing the show, maybe you can get yours in there too. And that
Yeah.
helps grow your audience.
Yeah. And tell me, are there things that you won't do, things that you've learned over the years? Well, let me rephrase this question. Of all the things that you've tried in the past that maybe didn't go the way you thought they would, what would be top of your no-no list?
Top of my no-no list are, it's a good one. They're primarily the technical faux pas that people make when they first start. For example, spending so much time talking about, well, this button just moved and now I don't know what to do, but I'm going to make this work. I'll make it work. And you're starting to talk so much on the technology, you're not focusing on what your message is.
Yeah.
So the big picture that I would say for that is try to get to the point where you're comfortable enough with the technology that you're not focused on it. It's just like using a phone. Like you've got your cell phone, you've gotten used to it. When you first got it, you have to stare at it for a while and try to figure out what all the buttons did.
Yes.
But after a while, you find the 3 or 5 things that you do regularly, and that's really what you do. And every once in a while, you might use some of the other 500 that you think you're going to use at some point.
Yeah.
Same thing with this tool. You
And I
want
have to say, I like what you're saying about the using of things regularly because there's no doubt about it. The more you use it, the more comfortable you become, and it's obvious to people on the screen.
Right, right. And so getting used to the tool, and because these tools tend to change, it's a good idea to check in with them every once in a while. So when you and I are doing what we're doing right now, we're making a video recording.
Yes.
We're using a Hangout on Air tool to do that. But we have another capability to do what's called a Hangout video call, which is not broadcast, it's not recorded, and it's so similar, meaning everything else looks the same pretty much except for a couple little different buttons, that if you continue conversing with other people using the tool, you become very familiar with it. And then as a result, when it's time to do your recordings and your broadcasts, then it's not that big of a deal. It's just like you were talking with someone yesterday.
Exactly right, because it's a proper conversation. And this has been an outstanding conversation, and I'm really enjoying it. But let me ask you just maybe one final closing question, because I knew this would be a great conversation, and maybe we might come back and do another one down the line. Um, If you think about all of the things that you've learned over the N number of years that you've been doing this, and you're giving advice to somebody who's getting started and they want to really develop the trust and influence that they generate with whoever is watching and the people they share these things with, what would be the most important thing, top of the list advice that you would give to people about better connection?
Well, it's going to be different than what most people would say.
Great.
Okay. I have this thing down here, allaboutHangouts.com, that helps you learn how to use the technology.
Yeah.
And as part of the training that we do there, I'm going to give you one of the biggest tips.
I'm delighted.
I don't suggest starting with your own Hangout on Air shows. I don't.
Oh.
I suggest watching other people's shows, interacting with the comments, and becoming known and liked and trusted from your commenting activity first. And because what that does is it helps build an audience so that when it is time for you to do a show or get invited into other people's shows, people already know you because of what you've been doing inside the comments. So even though the Hangout guy, me, would normally tell you, get into these Hangouts and get used to them, I'm actually telling you, don't. Get into the comments of other people's shows that are related to what you're interested in so that you can speak properly into that space. And that, to me, is actually probably the first thing that I suggest people do.
Well, I think that's great advice because, of course, if you want to influence people, it's very helpful to look at the conversations they've already been having. Mm-hmm. And you know, when I speak with people about better speaking, I say one of the things you need to understand is that most people are creatures of habit. So if you understand what people enjoy already, you'll do a better job.
Right. You know, there's layers and layers on top of that, but we're trying to just cover the things, right, that are the tent poles or the main areas that we want to really focus on. So involving being an active listener as well as an active commenter, I think, is one of the very first things I suggest people start with.
No, well, I think that's fantastic advice. And Ronnie, can I thank you for joining me today? I've really appreciated it.
Great. I've had a good time. I hope that your viewers and listeners are enjoying it as well.
Wonderful. Good. Well, thank you for listening today. And you've been listening to the Reluctant Speakers Club Expert Series. And until the next time, happy speaking.